Welcome to season 6, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming back. And I've got a great lineup for you guys this season. So stick around with us. Before we jump into today's conversation, I want to give you a little context. One thing I've been thinking a lot about is that Christians throughout every generation have had some sort of dominant lie that is kind of assumed in the culture that they are called to discern and address. And not only that, but these lies tend to take victims with it, like in our own day, which we're going to get to in just a minute. But I want to give you an example. Okay, so in ancient Rome, during the early church time, abortion and infanticide were common practices, especially with baby girls. They were not valued. Most families, even if they had lots of kids, it's recorded that they only had like one girl, and girls just weren't valued. So often they were left out to exposure, which is basically like left to die to the elements. Well, the church did not approve, as you can imagine, because the church saw the value in every human life. And so these Christians would go out to these fields where these baby girls were left to exposure, and they would rescue them, and they would basically adopt them and raise them up in their families in the church. Well, fast forward a generation, and now you've got a bunch of pagan Roman men who don't have enough women. I think there was like 100 women to every 140 men or something like that. Was not enough women. And so where did they have to look? They had to look in the church. So the early church actually practiced missionary dating, which I'm not recommending. I'm just saying the facts. Anyway, this spread Christianity big time in the Roman Empire because Christians were grounded in the truth that all humans have dignity because they are made in the image of God. This is a uniquely Christian gift to the world. They valued that, and they brought up these little lives to love Jesus in the church. Well, what are the lies that we're faced with today? We're faced with so many, but as Christians, we're called to discern the truth from the lies, because the lies aren't just in our mind, heady things. The lies grow feet and hands, and they take our neighbors down the wrong path, the way to not flourishing. But the Christian message is the way of flourishing, and to love our neighbors, we need to understand that. And so for the next 2 weeks, I want to take a deep dive into one of the major lies of our moment that's taking so many victims with it. And that is that we don't have a creator, that we can create our own identity and we can be whoever we want to be. So for example, in the story that we're going to tell today, the lie that is given to our young people is because you don't have a creator, you can create whoever you want to be. If you feel like you're born in the wrong body, well, change it. It's no big deal. But we know that it leaves irreversible damage to those people who are captured by this lie. My guest today is Chloe Cole. And Chloe was told this lie by everybody important in her life, and she bought into it. And then realized it does not bring satisfaction. But you guys, I'm not going to tell you any more of her story because I want you to hear her story from her. So enjoy this conversation with Chloe Cole. Okay. Well, Chloe, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Your story is so powerful, and I want to jump right into it. I want to start with, what was life like before this gender dysphoria kind of entered in?
All things considered, I had a pretty normal childhood in most ways. I was the youngest of 5 kids, and I was pretty squarely in the middle of being a tomboy and a girly girl. I really loved playing dress up with my older sisters and playing dolls with them, but I also liked being out in the world and exploring. I didn't mind getting my clothes dirty, and I loved playing video games with my older brothers. And the older that I got, the more that I just resonated with the men and the males in my life. I felt like I related a lot more to their personalities, their values, especially their sense of humor as well. But this was something that I never really took anything but confidence in. I liked that I felt different from my peers, until I got to a certain point in my childhood, and that was roughly around the time that I started to hit puberty, which was a little bit earlier in my life compared to other kids. And from pretty much as long as I can remember, there was just this feeling of being different in some way. And it was something that evolved over time as I got older. I had always had these different medical issues from very early on. I actually was born with a birth defect that I had to get several surgeries for. I was later diagnosed with a learning disability, and that helped me to later understand why I had some of these cognitive and social and emotional difficulties that other kids my age may not have had. But the more as I started to move through, especially the middle school period, there was this questioning of, how am I going to find my place in the world?
Yeah.
Who do I want to be when I grow up? And with the struggles that I'm increasingly having with fitting in, how am I going to navigate all of those things? Which all really, I think, are pretty formatively normal questions and experiences. But I didn't really have an adult in my life who, other than outside of my parents, who was properly guiding me through that. And I thought that I started to feel more and more like maybe there's something that's just fundamentally wrong with me. And so I started to go on this search for years and years, trying to find out, well, what is this problem that I have? What is it that's making me feel like I can't fit in and be as part of my peer group? And eventually, when I discovered the transgender community, it was the most I'd ever related to anybody in my life. It was these kids who had very similar upbringings to me. Some of them even had learning disabilities or some of the other developmental issues that I had. But a lot of them were just very creative, outside the box, just wonderful individuals. And I thought I had found my place. And I thought I had found...
You were finding this online? Mostly?
Yeah, it was pretty much all online. This was something that I was not learning about through school, through the curriculum, or through my peers. It was entirely through social media, which I had turned to after I had moved schools because I didn't really have a whole lot of friends during that time, and I wanted to still feel like there was somewhere for me to go.
Yeah. And what were you asking your parents these questions, or did they have any idea you were struggling?
Well, no, I didn't have the closest relationship to my mom and dad growing up, not because I was in an unhealthy situation with them. I felt comfortable with them, and I knew that they loved me, and I loved them to death. But there were just some things that I didn't really even know how to talk about. Right. And I think that part of that was just my age at the time. When you're a kid and you're at a certain age, it takes a lot of confidence to be able to go to anybody in your life and ask these deep questions about yourself and your identity, and maybe even some of the things that you might be exposed to from your peers or from the internet. And that certainly was the case for me. So a lot of this was kind of an internal turmoil that was going on for me that I just didn't have the confidence to reach out to anybody for, until one day after some reflection, I just came to the conclusion that, well, I can't just be a tomboy. Maybe the reason why I feel like I connect with the men so well in my life, and why I'm so uncomfortable with all the changes that are happening in my body as I go through puberty, are not because I'm just a normal girl, but because I was just destined to be a young man.
And this online community that you had found, they're kind of starting to say these things to you too, probably. And knowing what you know now, looking back, what are some of the major lies that were really enticing at the time?
Well, there are a lot of different ideas floating around, including that sex is something that's not binary, that there is a separation between biological sex as opposed to a sense of gender identity that comes from within the soul or from within the brain. And I was convinced that I had a male brain that was causing me to have more masculine behaviors now, rather than just natural variances in my personality. And a lot of things that I was experiencing at the time that now I could chalk down to as just normal thoughts and feelings during puberty were talked about in a very similar manner and painted as a sense of incongruence with your sex, or what they call gender dysphoria. And I thought that there was something within me that was causing me to behave differently. That was why I didn't like wearing dresses. That was why I didn't really relate to the other girls my age, and that I could diagnose that as me simply being a member of the opposite sex. And there was a lot of, I also had an intellectual interest as well in transgenderism, because it was something that was very novel to me at the time. And I'd always been kind of a bookish kid. My mother also was a nurse as well. So I'd always had an interest in things like psychology and physiology. And there was a lot of medical literature, including from my own healthcare provider, about transgenderism. And the more that I read into it, the more I thought, well, this sounds just like me. Maybe this is the path for me, and I'm going to find happiness through this. And watching these other kids go through the motions of transitioning, first starting with the social transition, and then eventually receiving validation for the changes that they were going through, and eventually going down the medical pathway and all the supposed excitement and personal exploration of that. It was something that I think really a lot of kids who grow up different, when you're bullied, when you're lonely, when you feel like you can't fit in, that sense of peace with yourself is something that a lot of us strive for, even if we don't realize it. Right. And so it touched me.
So who was the first person that you told, and how did they respond?
I think the first few people that I told it was mostly online friends. And I started to sort of expand my bubble of who I told at school about it as well, until eventually the first family member who I told was my older sister. And the reaction kind of varied between all of them. Like my older sister and my online friends were very, very lightly supportive, not really pushing me in any sort of direction other than the affirmation of like my name and such. But a lot of my friends at school, actually, they were the first ones to push back, but it wasn't in a way that I don't think, looking back on it, was very helpful. It was more of just like kids during the middle school stage tend to not be the nicest.
No.
And it was less out of concern and more so, well, this is just another thing that we can pick on her for.
So you start telling people. How old are you when you kind of start telling people about this?
I was 12 going on 13 at the time when I started to consider myself a young man, when I started telling people in my life about it.
Okay.
And
so then what happens? Like, you start telling people, and then where's the journey go?
Well, ironically, the negative response from my peers at school was something that I actually saw as kind of a motivating force for me to go forward, because I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to show them that one day I was going to look, sound, be a young man, and that they were going to take me seriously as one. And I don't exactly blame my friends online for saying, yes, you are a young man. Because I don't think they were my age, and they didn't know any better other than trying to make me feel comfortable. But it was like almost that little push that kept me confident in this decision. When I could have had somebody to tell me, no, this is not the right idea. This is something that is going to hurt you, and you can just be yourself without lying about who you are.
Right.
But eventually, the next step for me was I started to go through a social transition. I started to change my name to people who I was comfortable with. I started to cut my hair shorter. I started to buy more clothes from from the mall that were from the men's section, and starting to throw out some of my older clothes from some of my older feminine clothes. And eventually I told my mom and dad through a letter that I no longer wanted to be their daughter, but instead I wanted them to call me their son. I wanted them to call me by a new name. And when they received this letter, they were very shocked. And as I think any parent would be, nobody really expects to hear from their own child, especially from their baby daughter, that to hear from your own kid that they dislike this fundamental part of themselves so much they want to change. I think it's painful for anybody. Yeah. And my mom and dad were kind of at a loss. They didn't really know exactly what to say or do, other than I think they had a pretty sensible approach to it. They had no problem with me dressing or acting differently, but they never saw me as their daughter, and they especially did not want to push me down the route of a very permanent medical path.
Yeah.
But they wanted to seek additional counsel because this is something they had never dealt with before. So they started doing a little bit of research. Everything was pointing in the direction of either affirmation or seeking medical counsel as soon as possible. And what they thought that meant was, well, if we see a psychologist, then they'll help her through these feelings and they'll help guide her through it. And they'll just allow her to, she's going to wait until she's 18 to make any decisions that are governing her body.
Yeah, but that's not what happened.
No.
What did the psychologist say?
They had misguided my parents severely. They told them that basically there was no other choice than to transition me at the age that I was, that this was permanent, that this wasn't a phase, that every child fundamentally understands who they are from a very early age, and that I already knew that I wanted. But perhaps the biggest lie that they told my mom and dad was that I was at severe risk of suicide if they didn't do this now.
Wow.
And my mom and dad would never had said yes if they were given appropriate counsel on the harms of these treatments physically and psychologically, if they were informed about the likelihood that I would naturally end up growing out of this and becoming comfortable with myself as a woman again by the time I'd reach adulthood, or that I could regret this.
Yeah.
One thing that my dad has told me since was that if he knew of a Chloe Cole then, if he knew a single case of somebody regretting their transition and being harmed by it, he never would have said yes.
Yeah.
But they weren't told about that. And with being told that my life was on the line, they gave in.
Yeah.
Because they were doing their absolute best for me. They wanted me to be alive and well.
Right.
And so they said yes.
Right.
Because they thought it was the only option they had, that I had.
And I know you hear a lot of stories, I'm sure, of detransitioners. And that's the common lie, isn't it? That most parents are told is like, do you want a dead daughter or an alive son, right? And so that's what your parents were told as well. And I can't imagine the heartache that they had to walk through in all of this, like both you transitioning and detransitioning and realizing they could have helped you make a different decision, but didn't. But
well,
anyway.
It's more so, I think that they were doing the absolute best with everything that they had. And all the information that they were given at the time was just all the way in favor of transition, rather than exploring potential different options for me and looking, really observing where these feelings came from. And sure, I had been bullied throughout a lot of my childhood, and I had struggles with growing up with a learning disability, but a lot of what this could be chalked down to was just me having normal stress around growing up, and that a lot of girls experience as they enter adulthood.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us, if you are okay with this, how far you went in this transition, the whole medical stuff. Where did you end up?
So it began with a series of drugs, which the first of which was a puberty blocking agent called Lupron, which went on for about a year. And I was put on that alongside weekly injections of testosterone to masculinize my body. So the Lupron essentially put my body in a sort of, I wouldn't describe it as a stasis, because the body it never just stays in one state for long. If anything, because I was already going through puberty at the time, it put me into a sort of menopausal state while I was a teenager. So I started experiencing common menopausal side effects like hot flashes, uncontrollable sweating, itching, tingling, burning sensations throughout my body. When I was on them alone, emotionally, I was very numb. And because of how severe these side effects are, I felt pressured in a way to continue on with my transition, just so my body wouldn't keep suffering the way that it was. And the testosterone was an incredibly powerful drug. My voice deepened very, very quickly, very deeply. And eventually, within a matter of months, I looked like pretty much any other boy my age going into his high school years. Like, I had a deeper voice than pretty much all of them, for one. But I also had built a considerable amount of muscle. My body composition was starting to change, become more visibly masculine. And so I went through pretty much almost all of my high school career being seen as and treated as a young man and being socialized that way. Other than people who I had gone to elementary and middle school with, nobody really knew that I actually was a young woman, actually. So the final step of my medical transition was surgery. And at 15 years old, just after my sophomore year of high school, I underwent a radical double mastectomy to get rid of both of my breasts and to masculinize the appearance of my chest. And that proved to be, I think, the major turning point of my transition, when I realized just how much of a toll all of this was taking on my body, but especially with how sudden the changes were of the surgery, and just how grueling the healing process was in every single way. It like flipped a switch in my brain. And I had this epiphany that none of this was changing me in any meaningful way, but it was taking away parts of my health and potentially future parts of myself as an adult, as a woman, as somebody who was soon entering adulthood. And I was starting to figure out that one day I wanted to have kids. One day I wanted to get married. And actually, I was very naturally feminine. I wanted to experience all of the great things that come, all the great trials and tribulations that come with being a woman, of being a girlfriend and then a wife, and all the beautiful things that come with that feminine role. I realized there were a lot of things that I missed about that, and it would break my heart if I never would be able to become a mother. I really started to reflect on how these changes in my body were actually affecting me. Not only was it a much harder life to live, I also may never be able to reach those milestones of adulthood, of having a traditional marriage, of having children of my own. And that ended up being the nail in the coffin of my transition. All of those feelings, all of the grief that I was going through made me realize I can't continue this, but I will be able to find a life and personal fulfillment and happiness outside of it.
So how soon after the surgery did you start saying, no way, this is not for me?
It took me less than a year.
Wow.
It was about the 11-month mark when I chose to stop my transition, when I completely stopped taking hormones and I started taking steps to get out of it.
Mm-hmm. What were those steps? Like, how did you have to go find a doctor, and did they even know what to do?
So the first logical steps were the medical ones. Mm-hmm. And I stopped taking the hormones cold turkey because I hated even looking at the vial. I hated looking at the syringe and thinking about everything that had happened in the past 3 years of my life at that point.
Wow.
But I also didn't really have any good counsel from the same doctors who I had seen to go through this process in the first place. My psychologist, the psychologist who referred me to surgery had completely disregarded all of my concerns and pretty much all of the grief that I was going through. And she dismissed it as simply being another transition, or she suggested that maybe I was still transgender even. And it was just a complete slap to the face to everything that I had been through. And I wanted more than anything just to get out of that path, to derail and to go onto living a normal life without it. Mm-hmm. And with my physicians, when I went back to my endocrinologist, she refused to do simple tasks for me, like scheduling regular blood tests or even giving me results back with a chart that I could read to compare myself to other women my age. She kept sending me back the results for men. And when I went back to my other physicians and my surgeon, when I started having complications, I was given advice that actually made my scars and the wounds that I had worse. I had a skin infection in my chest for a few days, and I still get letters from my old healthcare provider referring to me with my old name, Leo, and as a young man. There's just within the medical system, there's just no acknowledgement of any sort of negative experiences from going through transition. There's no standards of care for those of us who regret or choose to detransition medically. Detransitioner is not even a word in any of the standards of care for transition. There's no bills to even code for. So a lot of time, doctors, even if they want to treat us, they have absolutely nothing to follow. So it can be incredibly disorienting. And even our own doctors who led us through this path they don't know what to do with us. They'll often shy away because it would just be continuing the experiment.
Yeah, right. So I was listening to a detransitioner, and she said one of the things that she said that really stuck out to me, and you kind of alluded to it earlier. She said, I was promised male puberty, and instead I got menopause. And when I heard her say that, I was sitting next to a doctor, and I said, what does that look like for a woman at 20 years old to be going through menopause? And she said, that's the thing, is that these hormone replacements that women in their 40s and 50s start getting on for menopause, that has not been tested on women at age 20 and for such a long period of time. And so anyway, I just wanted to know, like, do you feel that same way? Are you having to do hormone treatment again and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think I actually know the woman who you're speaking of, and I feel very similar sentiments about my own experience having gone through this as a child. Mm-hmm. Maybe outwardly I started to look like a young man, but the question is, what was actually going on inside of my body?
Right.
And from what I experienced, from what I have seen, mm-hmm. It can't be good.
Right.
During the time that I was on these treatments, and even years afterward, it's been over 4 years now for me since I've completely stopped this process. I'm still seeing the ill effects of every single one of the treatments that I was put on during this time. I started to see blood and even bits of tissue in my urine. I started experiencing these horrific pelvic cramps that were worse than any period cramps I have ever had in my life. I would literally drop to the ground, just curling up in a ball, screaming, crying, because it was that bad.
Wow.
And now, I mean, I'm left with skin issues on my chest.
Right.
I still have some urinary tract and pelvic issues and dysfunction in that part of my body. And I don't know what else I'm going to experience later down the line, because we just don't have enough clinical data on how these treatments, especially these cross-sex hormones in such massive doses, will affect the human body over a person's lifespan.
Yeah.
It's absolutely criminal. And we need to have the fact that we're continuing to experiment on thousands of young men and women and children without knowing how this is truly going to affect them in the end.
Yeah. It's terrible. Okay, sorry, I lost my train of thought because I want to ask you about your view of womanhood now, but there was, oh, no, I know what it was. Sorry. Fortunately, I have a great producer who can edit everything. Okay, you're kind of getting into this, why you are speaking out about it. Like, I'm hearing your frustration and your longing for others to know the truth before it's too late. But you are very vocal. It's easy to find Chloe Cole on the internet talking about this. And thank you for the courage that you have in doing this, because I think you're just exposing with a real story what is actually happening. But why are you? I just want to hear from you why you're choosing to speak out, even in the face of such backlash.
I knew from very early on in my transition, I knew from very early on in my detransition that I wanted to speak out about what had happened to me. But I also knew that in doing so, it would cost me a lot.
Yeah.
I would be making a lot of sacrifices, and that ended up being true. I ended up making more than I realized I would with my... I knew that it would cost me some of my friendships with people in the transgender community, but many of them already had been severed the moment that I detransitioned. Many of them had chosen to become angry at me just for the sole fact that I no longer was one of them. But I knew that truth triumphs over everything. And just one person being helped by me talking about my experience would make it incredibly worth it.
Yeah.
And even though I knew it was going to make so many of my friends angry, I had seen how they were suffering alongside me. I knew that this lifestyle was not helping them either. And I not only wanted to speak out for their sakes, but also for the sake of my generation and for the ones that will follow.
Yeah.
You know, as a youngest child, I never had to have the opportunity of babysitting and helping take care of another kid. And so I didn't really know just how beautiful childhood innocence is until some of my older siblings started having children of their own. And I got to experience that with my nephews and nieces for the first time. And when that happened, it was just like a light turning on in my brain. And I hated the thought of seeing them or thinking of any little baby experiencing one day what I have had, what I've gone through.
Right.
And I just felt compelled to do so. I really hoped that I didn't know what kind of journey I was about to embark upon, but I knew that it would be one that would not only greatly help me recover from everything, repurposing all the pain that I had gone through, but also potentially to help save other lives.
One of the things so like I mentioned before, you're in the documentary that Colson Center and Focus on the Family have just put out called Truth Rising. And in there, there's a quote from you that is just so short and so powerful. You say, there's no my truth and your truth. Jesus is the truth. So I want to hear that part of your story, Chloe. Like, how did you discover this?
A lot of people often think that I detransitioned solely for religious reasons, but I hadn't known of Christ then, even then. It wasn't until I embarked on this journey of speaking out and testifying and using my testimony that I discovered my true purpose and my true identity through Christ. And that was something that I realized later was a huge hole in my life that had been there for a very long time. I wasn't raised in a particularly religious household, and my mom and dad brought me to church up until I was in my late toddler stages. I was probably about 4 or 5 years old, and we just stopped attending as a family. I've since asked my dad and my mom why they stopped. And I haven't gotten the clearest response, but one of the things that my dad has said was that he wanted to give me and my siblings a chance to form our own opinions around the world, form our own worldview, independent of their beliefs. And I think this is a common sentiment amongst a lot of parents. But what this actually does, I think, is you're stripping your child of a spiritual and a moral and ethical foundation that really everybody needs as they grow up, especially as they start to enter the adolescent stage of their lives and they become more independent. They have to know how to properly conduct themselves. And so for a lot of my teenage life, I was just wrestling with myself, trying to understand not only myself, but also the world around me and why I was even here, what my purpose would be in life. And I wanted so badly for there to be something out there greater than me. But in a sense, transgenderism became a religion of its own for me. It gave me this false sense of agency over myself and my circumstances. I could even bend reality to my will. I could say that I was somebody who I was not. But that only lasted for so long, and in doing so, it hurt me horrifically. I literally lost healthy parts of my body to living a lie every day. So when it all crumbled, when it was time for me to stop my transition, I was once again searching. And without, again, much of a foundation to stand on anymore, I had gotten myself hurt. I had gotten myself burned quite a few times until around the time that I started to speak out, there were a lot of men and women who just came into my life who were Christian. Many of them had been raised in the church for pretty much their entire lives. But the way that they loved me was it was something that I had never really experienced before. It was so unconditional. And they weren't just yes men. They weren't the way that they loved me wasn't just saying yes to every single thing that I had ever done or every choice that I was making. They held me to a higher standard. They showed me that love doesn't mean just mindlessly giving in to something that somebody wants. It means showing true concern and compassion to somebody. And sometimes that means getting into arguments and making them upset. Not only was this massive for me, just growing as a person and into my adult years, but they also started to ask me questions that I had never really thought of, and introducing me to the Word of God and the Gospels. And the more that I thought about my life in the context of the Bible and in Jesus's life, the more that, I mean, there were so many different lessons that I was learning, but it just hit me then, like, everything that I was going through was for a purpose. That there is a God out there, that he created me beautifully the way that I was, with intention. I didn't just randomly come into this world. I was put here for a reason. And everything that I had been through, all the good, all the bad, God let me experience it. Not because he wanted me to suffer like I had once thought, but because he knew that it would strengthen me into the woman who I am today. And I think even more so than the fact that I shed my old life as a transgender person, that I stopped transitioning, becoming a Christian woman has been the single most transformative part, the single most transformative choice I've ever made.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that part of your story.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, thank you for touching upon that, because I feel like it's the biggest. I think it's the most important part of my testimony. I mean, I feel like I'm just a case example of how Christ can transform souls. That he can take all of the old, all of the broken parts of us and shape it into something anew. And it's something that has really given me a foundation as I've gone out into the world, as I've gone across the country, as I've gone even abroad to give my story. It gives me a reason to do so, and it gives me a foundation through which I can know how to conduct myself in a way that can help the people around me and the world around me the most.
Yeah. And it is impacting people. And it's so great, isn't it, that God uses those things that we think are going to take us out of being impactful, right? He uses those things to say, no, actually, I can make beauty here too. And I just think that's so amazing that in each of our stories, that's the case. Like, the thing that we think has taken us out of commission, is sidelined us for the rest of life. That is not true, because of exactly what you're saying, is that Christ transforms who we are, and that we are most free when we are living with and for him, which is so counter to what the world wants us to think, right? But I'm so glad that you were able to share that part of your story. And I'm so thankful that that is part of your story. It's beautiful. Okay. First question is, what books are you reading?
Honestly, I'm embarrassed that I'm not reading more, because I feel like everybody's reading books these days, and I'm trying to catch up.
Right.
But I also used to be like a really avid reader when I was a kid. It was just reading and writing were two of my favorite things to do when I was really young. And recently I have started to pick it back up a little bit, just as a hobby. I'm rereading some of my favorite childhood books, like The Outsiders was, I think, my absolute favorite when I was a kid. I read it for the first time when I was in my English class in 8th grade. And since, it's just been, both the book and the movie have just been some of my favorite media ever. I'm also reading Love and Economics, which explores kind of the relationships between, I think particularly like libertarian style economics, and how how economics plays a role in family dynamics and how family dynamics in reverse shape the health and the overall health of the country. And I'm also, of course, reading the Bible, as we all should.
Right. Oh, wow. Those are very different books, but like very well-rounded. You're so well-rounded, Chloe.
Thank you.
Okay. Last question is, if you could have coffee with any woman from history, who would it be?
I mean, that's a very unique question that I've never had before, but I guess the first woman to come to mind would be maybe Joan of Arc. I mean, back then, did they even have coffee back then?
Right. Yeah.
I feel like somebody from that part of history probably never had coffee.
Right. Probably not.
But also, I just feel like she would be such an interesting person to talk to because, I mean, I don't know. A lot of people often make the comparison between my own story and hers, which I think is so cool because she's I think she's one of the coolest women in history. But also, like, to be able to talk to a woman who, despite her circumstances, she was living in poverty, she was illiterate, and yet she led an entire armies. She strategized. She was incredibly intelligent, and she just relentlessly fought for her country. I think that's just such a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that's an awesome answer. I love that. Okay, guys, I'm glad that you joined us here to hear Chloe's answers to those two questions, but you have to hear her whole story. So go listen to the podcast. Also, check out Truth Rising. She's in a documentary called Truth Rising that the Colson Center and Focus on the Family have put together. So you can find that at truthrising.com/Colson. So go check that out as well and hear more from Chloe. Thanks, Chloe. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Chloe Cole. One of the beautiful things, friends, that we can stand on, assuredly, is that Christianity is real. Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ is coming again, and Christ is Lord. And that he is the creator, and he made us on purpose, with a purpose, as my friend Dr. Kathy Cook likes to say. And this is the way to flourishing for ourselves and for our neighbors. And so as we think through this lie that has captured so many, how can we speak truth in life where we are? And I'm so grateful of several things about Chloe's story, but one of the ones that stuck out the most to me is that in her detransition process, it was Christians who welcomed her. And that is so true. Like, they welcomed her, they supported her, and they helped her process through that. And not only that, they introduced her to Jesus Christ. And she said, that is the best part of my story. And I just love that so much. Well, next week, I'm having on Dr. Kathy Cook, who is a favorite of the Strong Women podcast. I'm going to talk to her about her newest book that she co-authored with Dr. Jeff Myers called Raising Gender Confident Kids. We focus our time together talking about how do we ground our young people in the beauty of their God-given design and identity. So I think you're going to really enjoy that conversation too. Plus, everybody enjoys hearing Dr. Kathy Cook no matter what. So come back and join us for that. Hey, you guys, the Colson Center has some really exciting things happening this fall as well. So I want to tell you about that. The biggest one is the launch of Truth Rising, which is a documentary put out by the Colson Center and Focus on the Family. Actually, Chloe is one of the featured guests in this film. So you're going to want to check out more of her story there. It's so good. The hosts are Oz Guinness and my husband, John Stone Street, and they walk us through why this is a civilizational moment. That's what Oz Guinness calls it. And what can we do about it? Well, in the first part of the film, Oz talks to leaders about what has brought us to this place in our culture where we have forgotten the Christian values that set the foundation for the freedoms that we enjoy, especially things like all humans have equal dignity. You guys, that is a uniquely Christian gift to the world. And then he also talks about, is it too late for us as a society to remember those values, to remember that foundation and where it came from. Then in the second half, John walks us through several stories of courage, which will inspire you and demonstrate that it is not an accident that we find ourselves in this time and in this place in history. Not only is it not an accident, but this is a time in history that we are called to and uniquely gifted to address and to join in with what God is doing at this time. Beginning on September 5th, you can watch this documentary for free at truthrising.com/Colson. Host a group in your home, host it at your church. That's what I'm doing. I'm hosting it at my church, and we're going to watch it all together and talk about it. So enjoy that. Go to truthrising.com/Colson and watch it. All right. See you next week, you guys.